5 divers secretly entered an underwater cave to explore, but when they tried to return, only one of them made it back to the surface. The companions on shore realized something was wrong and immediately dove into the water to search for them. In the end, they found only a lost camera and a flashlight. Why did 4 divers vanish together underwater? What exactly happened? This is the story of the Australian shaft cave diving tragedy. Near the limestone coast of South Australia, there is a unique little town called Mount Gambier. The entire city is built on the slopes of an extinct volcano, with countless caves and sinkholes underground that have been carved by water over millions of years. On the surface, the area looks peaceful, covered in green grass and seemingly ordinary, but few could imagine that beneath this land lies an entrance to another world. One day in 1938, a farmer named Ashby was plowing his field with a horse, when the animal suddenly stumbled over something hidden in the grass. After clearing away the weeds, Ashby discovered a hole in the ground about 30 centimeters wide. Lying on the ground and peering inside, he could see a faint reflection of water deep within the cave. Worried that someone might accidentally fall into it, Ashby began hauling over stones in an attempt to fill the hole, but even after throwing in thousands of rocks, there was still no sign of the cave filling up. In the end, Ashby had no choice but to give up. Decades later, when divers first entered the cave, they finally understood where all the stones Ashby had thrown had gone. Beneath the small opening at the surface lay a massive limestone cavern. The water surface sat about 7 meters below the entrance, and the chamber itself was nearly 17 meters wide. As divers continued exploring deeper, the true shape of the shaft gradually became clear. Below the waterline was a vast main chamber. The bottom of this chamber lay at a depth of 36 meters underwater. The stones Ashby had tossed down all those years ago had piled up here into a small mountain of rock. On both sides of the main chamber, there were also 2 tunnels descending into darkness. Due to the technological limitations of the time, no one knew what lay at the end of those tunnels. All they knew was that the deeper the divers went, the darker and narrower the passages became, while the bottom of the cave was covered with thick layers of silt. On May 27, 1973, a team of 9 elite divers arrived at the cave. Among them were 3 siblings, Christine, Glenn, and Stephen, who came from a family deeply involved in diving. In particular, 19-year-old Christine had just won the Welsh State Diving Championship. She had started diving at the age of 4 and had accumulated extensive experience over the past 15 years. However, despite the group's rich experience in open water diving, only the team leader, Robert, had actual cave diving experience. The team's plan that day was to descend into the main chamber for an exploratory dive, with a maximum depth of no more than 60 meters. The divers set up a tripod at the cave entrance and laid a guideline through the main chamber before entering the water one after another. The dive went smoothly that day. They saw the pile of rocks the farmer had once thrown into the cave, as well as the 2 bottomless tunnels on either side of the chamber. The strange and breathtaking experience of cave diving left the group wanting more, so they decided to return for another dive the next day. But that very night, Christine, her brother Stephen, their cousin John, and another diver named Gordon quietly began planning something far more dangerous. During the next day's dive, they intended to secretly enter the unexplored tunnel on the left side and make a rapid descent to a depth of 76 meters underwater. Without stopping, they would then quickly return to the surface, hoping to break the shaft's deep diving record. On the morning of May 28th, the 9 team members returned once again to the shaft. One of the female divers, Joan, was feeling slightly unwell, so she decided to remain on the shore to assist the others and prepare lunch for the group. The remaining 8 divers followed the guideline that had been laid earlier and successfully reached the rock pile at the bottom of the main chamber. At this point, they were already 40 meters underwater. According to the original public plan, everyone was supposed to remain inside the main chamber for exploration, with a maximum depth limit of no more than 60 meters. At that depth, the opening above could still serve as a natural reference point, making the dive relatively safe. However, during the exploration, team leader Robert began to feel dizzy. Symptoms of nitrogen narcosis had already appeared. At that time, mixed gas diving was not yet widely used. Each diver carried only standard compressed air tanks. This meant that once the depth exceeded 30 meters, nitrogen under high pressure would dissolve into the bloodstream, causing nitrogen narcosis, a condition similar to drunkenness, leading to impaired judgment and slowed reactions. An experienced diver, Robert realized something was wrong with his condition. He signaled to his companions that he would return to the safer diving area. The others responded with an okay hand signal and continued exploring the main chamber. Shortly after Robert surfaced, Christine and 3 others rapidly descended into the deeper section of the left side tunnel. Larry, who was at the back of the group and curious, followed them as well. Unaware of what was happening, Glenn watched the 5 figures gradually disappear into the darkness without much concern. He assumed his sister Christine would only take a quick look ahead and then return, so Glenn turned around and began ascending. On his way up, he encountered Robert and Peter, and the 3 of them surfaced together. Meanwhile, the 5-person team underwater had already descended to a depth of 70 meters. Here, the passage narrowed sharply. The surroundings were completely dark, with only flashlight beams cutting through the blackness. The oppressive environment quickly made Larry, at the rear, feel uncomfortable. He checked his air pressure gauge, and, realizing his remaining gas was limited, immediately signaled the others to ascend. But the moment the team turned around, disaster struck. Inside the narrow 70-meter deep passage, the movements of the 5 divers stirred up decades of accumulated silt on the cave floor. The once clear water instantly turned murky and chaotic. Visibility dropped to 0. Even worse, none of the 5 had laid a guideline. They were now completely lost, in darkness and muddy water. In the panic, Larry saw Christine and Gordon frantically crashing upward toward the ceiling of the tunnel. At that moment, his own flashlight suddenly went out. Panicked, Larry repeatedly struck his equipment in the darkness. When the light came back on, he realized he had drifted away from his original position. Even more terrifying, he saw another diver, swimming desperately deeper into the cave, as if being drawn toward something unseen. Larry no longer dared to stay. His air supply was nearly exhausted. Driven by survival instinct, he swam upward with all his strength. Relying on the faint glow from the shaft entrance, he finally found the true exit, and managed to surface just before running out of gas. Seeing the terrified Larry emerge, Glenn immediately realized something had gone wrong. He grabbed a spare air tank and dove back down without hesitation. He descended all the way to the underwater cliff at 60 meters. There, he found his brother Steven's flashlight and camera. Beyond that point lay endless darkness and swirling silt. Glenn attempted to cross the drop-off and enter the silty zone, but the visibility was far too poor. In the end, he had no choice but to surface again. Afterward, Peter also dived down to search, but he too found nothing. Joan, who had remained on shore, called emergency services as soon as the accident unfolded. Police and ambulances quickly arrived on the scene, but everyone knew that the chances of the 4 divers surviving underwater were extremely slim. In addition, given the nearly 100-meter depth and the murky water conditions, the recovery technology at the time was simply incapable of carrying out a rescue. In the end, after several attempted search operations, the police were forced to suspend the mission. However, 8 months later, an unexpected discovery brought this tragedy back into the spotlight. At the time, a documentary film crew arrived at the shaft to shoot footage. They used professional lighting equipment and descended to a depth of about 15 meters for filming. When the cameraman turned toward his colleagues, he suddenly noticed what appeared to be a 4th person behind them. The 3 of them moved closer to take a look, and were horrified. It was the body of a diver in a wetsuit, the remains of 22-year-old Steven. His buoyancy vest was still inflated, and his body was wedged in a rock crevice at a depth of 15 meters. Perhaps in his final moments, he had tried to ascend using his remaining gas, but became trapped against the rocks, and remained there forever. The remaining 3 bodies were not recovered until March 1974, when a more experienced dive team located them. Christine and Gordon were found at a depth of around 55 meters, lying face up and close together. John's body was discovered at approximately 75 meters. According to later analysis, Christine and Gordon likely became disoriented under the combined effects of panic and nitrogen narcosis. They may have mistaken a reflective false ceiling for an exit to the surface, and ultimately ran out of gas and died there. John, on the other hand, was likely affected by nitrogen narcosis as well. He may have swum in the opposite direction, going deeper and deeper, and ultimately perished from gas depletion.